Today on the Elly interview, we'll be talking to Bruce Sellery. And for those of you who don't know Bruce, he is currently the money columnist for CBC Radio, Money Sense, and Cityline. He's also the founder of Moolala, which is dedicated to inspiring people to get a handle on their money so that they can live the life they want. In this segment, Bruce shares with us his experience as an undergrad at Queen's, what it was like for him, managing his finances, so we get his perspective on it, as well as sharing some tips for undergraduates today, what they can be doing to lay the foundation for their future financial endeavors. So I hope you enjoyed this segment with Bruce. Bruce, thank you so much for being here with us.
Totally my pleasure.
Okay, so before we get into your wisdom and advice for students on managing their finances while they're an undergrad and perhaps when they graduate, I think I want to get to know you a little bit better. So my question is, when you were an undergrad at Queen's, what was your relationship with money?
Well, it was pretty well formed by the time I arrived at undergrad. So two things. One is I come from a family in which there are a lot of values around teaching kids with money. I'm one of 6 kids, and my dad had a little ledger. So in order to keep track of all of our allowance, he didn't hand us a quarter or a nickel or a dime. He tracked it in a ledger. And every time you wanted to spend money, you would go to my dad and he would pull the ledger down from a high shelf. And he would always ask, what do you want to buy? And so there wasn't judgment about it. He didn't restrict what we could buy, but there was an intentionality about it. So I was lucky in that I was raised in an environment where we talked about it, we could learn from him, and it was modeled very effectively by my parents. The second thing is I worked. So when I was 13, my brother sold me his year-round property maintenance business for 50% of year 1 revenues and book value on equipment. So it was like a big deal.
Wow.
How old were you? At the time. I was 13. I was just finishing grade 8. And so I had no idea what this actually would entail. It was a tremendous amount of work, but it meant that I was always earning money. And in addition to running the business, I babysat, I ushered at a theater, I worked at Herbie's Drug Warehouse where your bargain is in the bag. And I just did all this stuff. So I always was making money and very focused on the kinds of things that would make a difference for me of where I would spend that money. So all that to say, I showed up at undergrad having just returned from 6 months backpacking across Europe on my own dime. So that was helpful in that I had been managing my money back in the day. We used traveler's checks. I don't remember traveler's checks, but you would carry them in a little safe around your waist. And you
might have to put a definition for some people.
It's like a piece of paper that has money on it, kind of like a check, but you couldn't go to a bank machine and just withdraw money. You couldn't use a credit card. You had to have cash in the local currency. So in Greece, it was the drachma. In Italy, it was the lira. And you had to be very, very careful with how you spent it, because if you had too much drachma and not enough lira. Anyway, so I showed up in undergrad having a lot of skills already developed that I think a lot of kids don't have for lots of different reasons. Back in my day, most of my peers worked. We just always worked. And these days, and I'm generalizing here, but as a percentage, there is a lower percentage of young people who have the grunt jobs at McDonald's or Tim Hortons than they did in my era. And I think that's just the reality. They're focused on school or they're doing whatever, but you don't learn the skills if you can't learn how to use the tool if you don't have the tool in your hand.
No pun intended, but you had money sense way back when.
I did.
Yeah. And a strong work ethic to go with it. What advice would you have for someone who's just starting university or halfway through, seeing that given this climate that they're in, what kind of behavioral tips would you give them that they should be doing really early on, so that even though they don't have the cash to manage yet, it is something that will serve them well later on in life?
Yeah. So I have developed something called the priority pyramid. Picture a triangle. It is a riff on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which many undergrads will study in Psych 101. If you don't, Google it. You'll see basically what I mean. And the idea is that with personal finance, really there are layers of things you need to get on top of. And if you don't have the foundational layer set, there's no point in moving up the pyramid. It's not going to be helpful to you. So the layers are as follows: cash flow, debt, savings, tax stuff like RRSPs, TFSAs, investments, and then only at the tippy top you optimize returns. And the reason I developed this model was that people are so confused by all the stuff that there is to do. And when you look at this pyramid, it's very liberating, because then you realize I don't have to pay attention to Uncle Vern and his cannabis stock picks, because I'm just trying to earn more than I'm spending. So I don't need to worry about optimizing my returns up there. If you don't have a credit card, you don't need to worry about consumer debt. It's not relevant to you. So you can kind of pick and choose what's relevant. For most undergrads, the biggest challenge is cash flow, right? So they've got money coming in and money going out, and some of the sources of that money might be part-time jobs. It might be money from their parents who are liquidating an RESP. It could be student loans. It could be scholarships. So there's all this, whatever's coming in there. And then there's a lot going out, which is books and tuition and accommodation and transportation and beverages. There are 1 or 2 beverages that undergrad students sometimes choose to consume. So you have to figure out how you balance those 2 things. And I think the number one thing is to live within your means. The number one thing. And there are lots of different tactics on how you can do that. I am not, don't tell anyone this, I'm not a fan of budgeting.
I'll keep your secrets safe.
I know, it's scandalous, right? And I have a couple of reasons for that. Is I think it's not that I'm not a fan of knowing where your money is going, because I am. It's that managing your budget with such specificity in the way that a textbook budget works isn't sustainable over time. It's just not sustainable over time. And
it's painful too, right?
It's painful, and that's why it's not sustainable. It's akin to measuring and weighing every single morsel of food that you put in your mouth. Absolutely, people do that, and it's great if you're trying to lose 10 pounds. Fantastic. You could do it for 3 months or a year, but you can't. It's very difficult for most people to do that for a lifetime. So instead, what I advocate is a sustainable spending model, which is ABCs. The ABCs, ABC, analyze, brainstorm, change. So for students, it's to look at what's coming in and what's going out on a spreadsheet. Like, oh, okay, I've got, $10,000 is my undergrad tuition. I've got $10,000 from a student loan. I've got whatever it is. So you analyze all that, and you know what's coming in, you know what's going out. The brainstorm phase is, what can I do differently? So you may say, well, I've allocated, like $200 to an entertainment budget. I'm spending way more than that because I'm having a grand old time and I don't want to spend less than that. Awesome. So now's the time to get a part-time job, because then you can say, I'm going to earn more income to allow me to spend more on entertainment, for example. And so you brainstorm all sorts of ideas, and then you choose a couple of things to change. Analyze, brainstorm, change. And that's really I think the way that's going to set you up with great financial habits over time, which was what most of this is, right? In undergrad, you've got the tool, you're not necessarily living on your own, but you've much more agency than you did as a high school student. And this is about developing great habits when you're young.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think those were amazing tips. I like the ABC. It's simple, well laid out, and it's easy to follow.
Good.
So do you want to leave our students with, some memorable quote from you, or something that they can take and put you on the spot?
A memorable quote. Listen, you could never put me on the spot. I will say 2 quick things. One is focus on making saving easy and spending hard. And the problem with that is—
That's a good quote, by the way. I like that.
Thank you. Most innovation in financial services, not all, but most of it has been around reducing the friction on spending. This is the wrong direction. We want to reduce the friction on savings. Automate your savings, get it out of your bank account, and make spending hard. And so if you have a hard time managing your cash because you're using a debit card or a credit card, stop that and go to the bar with bills. And once the bills are done, you're done and you're headed home. So
the pain of cash.
Yeah, spending difficult, saving easy is the kind of framework. And then the last thing I will say is I want everyone to answer the question, what is my money for? Because that's really the number one question we need to do. Aside from food and shelter, what's it for? Is it family? Is it beauty? Is it experiences? Is it travel? Is it choices? Is it legacy? Is it prestige? What is it for? Because you need to start with your motivation. And if you have your motivation, you are way more likely to take the steps you need to take to get a handle on your money.
That's amazing. Thank you, Bruce, so much. I think our students will find this segment really helpful.
Good. My pleasure.